Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Daily Palantir. We've got some breaking news in the world of Palantir. And, I thought I wasn't going to go live today. I am going to go live tomorrow, but then I decided, given the news that was happening, it would be really nice to spend 30 minutes and discuss with the community and see what everyone's thinking about this topic. Mrs. Cathie Wood has purchased 873,000 shares of Palantir. And when I got this notification, honestly, I couldn't believe it because I forgot that ARK publishes their trades every single day. Even though that's something I should know, I get an email for it, but still I forgot. And so someone tagged me on Twitter and I was like, oh yeah, I have to forget. And I forgot. And this is 803. I checked it and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is a lot of Palantir shares. And I have a lot of thoughts for why she bought some Palantir shares. So we're going to talk about all that. We're going to spend about 30 minutes discussing this. I'm live on Twitter Spaces as well for those that are on Twitter Spaces. And we will discuss this. A couple of quick things I want to say. I'm not going to go super deep into earnings today. I have an earnings video coming out tomorrow. I'll talk a little bit about earnings here, but I want to focus on Cathie more, and then we'll probably spend 10 minutes on earnings. Tomorrow, I will be with Jeremy Financial Education on my YouTube channel discussing more around Palantir earnings, and also Dan Ives, 4:30 p.m. Eastern this Friday. So if you're watching on YouTube, it's going to be on Twitter Spaces. Twitter link is in the description. Make sure you're there. Make sure you follow Dan Ives, equity analyst that put out the $25 price target. That'll be 5 p.m. on Friday this week. And if you guys are on Twitter, then you can just tune in on Twitter. Okay, so let's get into it. She's back. She's back. She's back. She's back. She's back. And the reason she is back, which is such a unique reason for why she's back, in my opinion, is because she believes the business has now fundamentally stabilized. And as a result of her feeling the business is stabilized, she feels confident in buying shares. Cathie Wood has not purchased shares in Palantir since May of 2023. Some people forget that she liquidated her entire portfolio of Palantir, which included 37 million shares and a $400 million drawdown, correct? $400 million down on the portfolio in, when did she do this? She did it in February 2022. So February 2022, I was very confused because all throughout 2021, she was just acquiring a crap ton of shares. I mean, she was really putting herself in a position to have Palantir as one of those generational companies in her portfolio. And it seemed really evident. She had more than $1 billion worth of stock. Again, she had 37 million shares. And the very interesting thing about how she was approaching Palantir back in 2022 was that in 2021, at $20, $22, $18, she was loading up a lot. I mean, there were days where she was buying 3-4 million shares every day. It got a lot of people interested into Palantir. And the thesis then was that Palantir is one of the most interesting and unique technology companies in the world, powered by artificial intelligence. ARK's big ideas thesis is that by 2030, there's going to be $80 trillion of GDP creation, 80 trillion because of AI. I don't necessarily agree with everything that she says on that, but I mean, that was her overall thesis. So Palantir seemed like a no-brainer, and it was the only stock in 6 of her overall ETFs. Then, it's like you were dating a girl, and out of nowhere, she gets upset at you, and you're like, why are you upset? And she continues to be upset, and she starts selling it off. And I remember making a video back in January. I was like, look, guys. She's rebalancing the portfolio. That's okay. You got to sell some, but it's just how the ETF were actively made all this garbage. And then I'm hit with, I think on like February 15th or something, one day after Valentine's Day, how ironic, where the whole portfolio is gone. It's just done. It's like a 7 million shares sold off, and there's like 10 shares left, or like 1,000 shares left of Palantir in the ETF. And I'm just sitting there like I thought we said our vows to each other. I thought this was a forever thing, and this turned out not to be a forever thing. And so that was really hard for the Palantir community to accept, because Cathie Wood was at the time one of these icons when it came to investing and like innovation and all this stuff. And we thought at that point Palantir was not innovative. Apparently, it was a good sell because she sold it at $12. Her average was around 21, and the stock dropped all the way down to 6. Now, granted, if she had just averaged down and had an average of 8 or 9, she would be up, close to 200% for that position. And that was a very hefty position. But her argument was that the opportunity cost was better, and she's putting that opportunity cost somewhere else. The problem is that I don't know where the opportunity cost went. Maybe it went to Tesla, and maybe she's up on that. Maybe Roku, she got into some averages, Zoom. But the problem was that February 2022, the market was still pretty elevated. The S&P was at 460. So we still had a long drawdown to 340 on the S&P ready to go. So whatever she bought when she sold Palantir, there's no way that any of those stocks matured greater than Palantir. Maybe Tesla, but even at the time, if she was buying all of that Tesla, that was at a pretty elevated price. So the sale of it just made no sense if you had a thesis around AI and innovation. Now, her logic, and Brett Winton's or Winton, the head chief futurist, that's his actual title at ARK, his argument was the reason they sold Palantir was because they believe there's too much competition in the defense space, and Palantir is a defense contractor that really isn't able to scale the government business. Then the Ukraine war happens, and the only company, to the best of all of our knowledge, that is actually providing mission critical software on the battlefield is Palantir. Not only to mention, they put out a blog today that they saved around 128, or they helped relocate 128,000 Ukrainian refugees. I mean, like, there's not that many softwares on the planet that are able to do this, and much less able to be there right when it's time to be active. And so the idea that there was some weird like competition in the government space that they couldn't overcome, or that there were too many government vendors. I mean, I remember Brett was like, the government now wants to do multi-sourcing vendors for all their products. Then Palantir gets $110 million 3 weeks ago, and there was no multi-vendor sourcing because there were no other competitors competing for the products because they were sole sourced contracts, which means Palantir didn't have any competition for the bidding. It was their contract to get, and the government had to give it to Palantir because no one else wanted to compete, and the government needed those services. And so the idea, this like kind of myth that was created, and I'll get to the comments in a second, that the government business was going to be this overhang, they're not able to compete, and then they can't scale to commercial. None of it made any sense. And as a result of that, in May 2023, Cathie Wood comes back, 5.3 million shares, $8 or $9. Now, what was very interesting to me over the summer months, I know it's last month of summer, August or September is last month, but it's starting to get cold outside here in New Jersey. So starting to feel like fall is on the way. Over the past 2 months, June and July, she didn't buy a single share. And it was very, very weird. Why is she not buying a single share? You bought it at $9. She's up, almost 100% on that $9. At one point, it was more than 100% on that $9 when Palantir was 20. 5 million shares. You're sitting on a nice gain. Like, why did you not load the boat at $8 or $9? Because something changed in May 2023. It was their earnings. I mean, they showed income from operations, so they were GAAP profitable. Where if you wanted to establish a position in Palantir at $8 or $9, it was still $8 or $9 when they were GAAP profitable, right? It's not like the Q4 2022 when they became GAAP profitable from like the Japan thing that they did. This was real net income that they were showing. And so I thought Cathie Wood was going to load up 20, 30 million shares. I thought she was going to really establish a position, but she like just chose not to. And the weird thing about this buy right now is that 3 months later, we had a pretty basic earnings. It was very lackluster. Nothing was exciting about this earnings. The $1 billion share buyback was just to appease Wall Street. The revenue growth was abysmal at 13%, right? Not exciting. Again, not horrible, but not like amazing. And the EPS, we're GAAP profitable. Customer count, it went up 8%. That's nice, but it's not insane explosive growth. All we are betting on is that these 400 customers they have, or 400 leads in the pipeline using AIP, is going to show significant growth in terms of revenue potential over the next 12 months, which I believe is going to happen. And I believe that's actually the secret to Palantir and the network effect they're creating. And it's going to be pretty massive over the next year and a half. But there's nothing substantial that changed in the past 3 months. I mean, you just waited for the stock to go up $7, and you're paying a $40 billion market cap versus a $25 billion market cap for a pretty lackluster quarter. So it seems like they needed Q2 to come in and validate that Palantir is definitely on the path to S&P 500. Palantir is definitely going to be GAAP profitable. Palantir is definitely doing the things they need to do. AIP is definitely growing, even though it's not really growing, but it's growing in the sense of like they're filling up the pipeline for it in order for them to validate the buy. And that to me is just very weird. That's like, I didn't expect them needing that long to be able to make that decision. And again, the reason I'm always hard on Cathie and ARK, that didn't sound right, but you know what I mean. The reason I'm always tough on them is because they've got hundreds of millions of dollars worth to invest in research, and we are all retail investors. So if we can buy it at $8-9 because we can come up with a thesis, which a lot of us were, she can as well. And so it's very weird when one of the most famous research firms in the United States of America can't come up with a thesis at $8 or $9, and they need to wait until the price is this expensive. I mean, it's not good. Today, I would not be happy owning ARK. I don't own the ETF. I don't think I will ever own the ETF, no matter how much Palantir she buys, because the woman is irrational with how they make decisions, and not just her, but the entire team. And buying Palantir at 17, if I was a shareholder, I would be like, you're kind of buying it at the top. I mean, she probably bought at 16 today, 1640, 1650, 17, 1710. It has to be within the 1620 to 1750 range. That's where she bought shares. I personally think, given the growth rate, it's a bit overvalued. Now, can it stay overvalued? Sure. But buying it now versus not buying it at 12, 13, if you had your thesis, was very weird in the context of how ARK is operating. So, I mean, overall, in my opinion, I'm happy that she's back in, but it didn't seem like she was, supposed to be. It didn't seem like she is buying on the right time. It seemed like she could have bought a lot earlier. Let me get to some of the comments, and then I have some more thoughts on what this means for the future of Palantir now that Cathie Wood is back in, and what it means for other institutions, along with it providing a floor to the stock. Let's see some comments we got here. It's great news that she bought regardless of past baggage. I agree. I still think I'm just objectively, it's not the best buy if you're an ARK shareholder, but for Palantir shareholders, this is the greatest buy. I mean, I'm very, very happy that she was able to get into Palantir. Damn, Amit is hairy. That is correct. I am definitely hairy. Let's see what other comments we got. Y'all are missing the real reason she bought. Palantir made a meaningful trajectory change this earnings. I disagree. I don't think Palantir made a meaningful trajectory change this earnings at all. I mean, Palantir just showed us that AIP growth is likely going to happen, but even if they didn't, I wouldn't shame them for them. Remember, it's been 10 weeks since they rolled out AIP. So the growth they're showing in terms of the pipeline they have, phenomenal. Like, I have my earnings video coming out tomorrow. You're going to hear me talk about that a lot. But this earnings was like, let's be objective. This earnings showed zero trajectory change for the business to somehow get back to the 4.5 billion CAR promised us in 2022 that we would get in 2025. It's just, they did not prove anything to show that. GAAP profitability was a given. The $1 billion share buyback, that means nothing, especially because they're probably not going to even do that anytime soon. And we're only profitable because of interest income. By the way, in my video tomorrow, all of that stuff to me is a good thing. I'm sounding like it's bad, but all of it's good in my opinion. The problem is there was no fundamental, like, we're growing 30, 40%, we're revising guidance massively. None of that was there. So I say all that to say, I expected that. It was Q2. It's hard. It's a hard quarter for all SaaS companies. Interest rates are at 5%. I didn't expect them to have some blowout quarter, but for Cathie to now gain the conviction after this quarter, it makes me question Cathie more than anything. I'm happy she bought, but it really makes me question what the hell were they looking for the past 3 months to buy after yesterday's earnings? I mean, did you think management was lying when they said they were going to be the S&P 500? Did you really need that 1 cent per share to prove that they're definitely getting closer to GAAP profitability? I really don't know exactly what she will need. Chill, Cathie will sell out in 6 months, maybe. I think for Palantir, she's actually trying to establish a position. Unless Palantir runs up to 30, I don't think they're selling. If they didn't sell from the run from 9 to 20, which, by the way, I wouldn't have blamed them. They bought at 9, 5.3 million shares. They took a lot of losses over the past couple of years. Selling at 20 would have been a really good sell for them, in my opinion. But they didn't do it. And so I kind of think they have a thesis that's starting to form around Palantir that's more long-term. And we might be getting back to hooking up with our ex and then eventually marrying that ex because that ex was our high school sweetheart. And it's time to tie the knot with the one true love. That it might actually be happening. So we will see where it goes from there. Now, what does this mean overall for the trajectory of the company? I think there's a couple of implications that are important to understand. Number one, I think this is providing some level of an interesting floor to the company. There's two components to this. Number one, Palantir authorized $1 billion in share buyback. They are not going to buy back the stock anytime soon, in my opinion. The reason they did this is because they needed to play the game with Wall Street. The stock probably would have tanked yesterday if they didn't include the $1 billion share buyback. So in my opinion, they were like, all right, we have $3 billion in cash. We really don't know what to do with it, that's a conversation for another day. It's probably not worth investing into sales and marketing because interest rates are 5%. Maybe we can't sell into enterprises the way we thought we were going to be able to sell because enterprises just don't want our product right now with interest rates at 5%. So maybe interest rates need to go down. Then we invest more in sales and marketing. This is my hypothesis. So for now, let's just collect money from T-bills. And they collected $11 million in Q2 on T-bills, and I think $17 million in Q1 to ensure we're GAAP profitable. And let's authorize $1 billion share buyback. And let's make sure Wall Street doesn't lose their shit if the stock drops a little bit, because Wall Street will always know, well, Palantir could just buy back shares. If Palantir goes back to 11 or 12, Wall Street will always know maybe it shouldn't go to 8 because Palantir is probably going to buy back at 11 or 12. So, companies do this all the time. Apple buys $20 billion worth of shares every single quarter because it's really hard to take a company that's $1 trillion and turn it into $3 trillion unless you do something to artificially financially engineer your earnings per share. There's no way they can just constantly show earnings per share growth without doing something with their stock. Because at the end of the day, you have to play the game with Wall Street with stock. So remember, as Austin says in the chat, the buyback is an authorization, but it's not going to happen. And even if you read the actual fine print, they said, look, we don't even have to buy back our shares. We're not obligated to do anything with this $1 billion. It's just out on the table. That combined with Cathie buying 800,000 shares. 800 is not a small amount. I mean, 800,000 shares is a shit ton of shares. $16 million worth of shares. I think that's giving some level of hopefully consolidation within the $14 to $16 range. Now, I could be totally wrong. We could have Moody's lose their mood and all their stuff tomorrow and decide to downgrade every single bank of the United States. We could have Abercrombie and Fitch decide to get mad at Hollister and say that the United States is worth nothing because our military doesn't matter, so the credit rating, it doesn't exist. We could have inflation reaccelerate when we get the Thursday CPI data and the market could sell off. There's a ton of macro events that could happen that could designate a further decline in every stock, much less Palantir. But the $1 billion share buyback being on the table gives, to me, Wall Street some level of confidence, which is why the stock isn't fully tanked for the bad growth numbers. And I think it gave Cathie some confidence to be like, look, what is the real implication of issuing a $1 billion share buyback? The implication is that you believe in yourself, right? Like at the end of the day, you believe in yourself. You're taking a bet on yourself. And if you're taking a bet on yourself, as Karp said in the Q2 earnings call, versus acquiring other companies, then you are going to buy back your own shares, right? You're going to buy back your own stuff versus spending that billion to buy back some artificial intelligence company. Like Karp says, we think we can make the best products in the world. And so as a result of that, that is somehow signaling to the market. And I think it's signaling to Cathie that Palantir feels comfortable at 15, 16 bucks in terms of where their trajectory is. Yes, it's a $40 billion company. Is the valuation overstretched? Sure. But some people, including myself, think this could be a $300 to $400 billion company over the next 10 years. And if that's the case, 40 billion is cheap. Now, given the growth rates we're seeing, it's not cheap, and it's hard. I wouldn't recommend to buy the stock right now, just given I feel it's a bit expensive with the growth rates. But Cathie, who is this growth investor, and now Palantir is profitable, so it's not unprofitable growth. Maybe she's thinking Palantir is betting on themselves. Palantir is creating a artificial floor for what their stock price could be by playing the game. They've basically artificially created gap profitability with net interest income for the past 3 quarters. They need one more quarter. Then they're in the S&P 500. When you're in the S&P 500, the institutional exposure that's going to happen makes it very unlikely we go back to $9, which was her average. So she must have put all those pieces together and made the decision that if they're willing to buy back their own stock, if they're definitely going to be gap profitable, and I needed that 1 quarter to guarantee it's going to be gap profitable, and they're going to be in the S&P 500, there is no reason for me to not load up at $40 billion, because maybe it could be $80 billion in the next couple of years. That is one thesis I have on why Cathie Wood bought shares. And that's, hopefully the best analysis I can provide. But I mean, I think that is ultimately the reason she decided to get into this game and come back into Palantir. She's back. We're hooking up with her ex. Sometimes you got to do this, and sometimes it's got to happen. Dan Ives, what's up? Let me get to some of the comments. I see Lewis Hamilton, you requested in the chat, so I'll pull you up in just 2 minutes, and then you'll speak on Twitter to everyone that is here. Richard Robinson says Dan Ives was so excited about AIP. I agree, and it was very interesting. It was very interesting that Dan Ives puts a $25 price target report a week before earnings. I was the guy on the internet questioning the peculiarity. That's not a word, but the timeliness that was oddly peculiar around, the report. And then next thing you know, he shows up on the earnings call. It's just really funny how Wall Street and these equity analysts and these it's just funny how that works out, that the guy puts out a report, says Palantir to $25, and next thing you know, on the earnings call, he's one of the 2 equity analysts that is chosen to ask a question. It's just funny how that happens sometimes. And he asked just like the best question. He says, hey, AIP is awesome. Why are you so excited about it? And then Karp takes that alley and he motherfucking oops it. And he says, well, here's why we're excited about AIP, Dan. As a shareholder, I love seeing that happen, but obviously it's just hilarious to see how that ends up going down. All right, let me accept some Twitter questions. Lewis Hamilton, I know you requested. You are live with 470 people. You are live with 470 people on YouTube, and I think 50 on Twitter. Whenever you're good, you can speak. You just got to unmute yourself, and then you're good to go. Okay, you're a speaker. Give you another 10 seconds. If not, we'll just go back to the YouTube questions. And if anyone else on Twitter wants to ask a question, you can request, and then you can see.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, great. I'm so sorry. So I just started listening in and talking about Palantir, and I appreciate all of the analysis that, at a micro level. It's just a point of curiosity. Has anybody brought up the association of Rubicon with ticker RBT with Palantir, given Palantir's heavy investment in Rubicon? And I don't mean to go off on a pipe dream if anybody didn't already bring it up, but I think it's worth mention here, given Rubicon's affiliate Palantir's investment in RBT, which is waste management with AI, which was just on the news anyway. So, yeah.
Absolutely awesome. Thank you so much for the question. Yeah, we'll touch on that for a couple minutes and then we'll go back to Cathie Wood. Yeah, it's an interesting thing, this idea around RBT. Let me just plug in my mic. Okay, there we go. Mic should be there. So the idea around RBT is really interesting because Rubicon Technologies has rallied, I don't know, like 200-300% in the past couple of days. It might be down right now, but it did rally a little bit. It is waste management with AI. I did an interview on YouTube. If you type in Palantir, recycling, trash, emit, you'll probably find the interview. It's really interesting. It was a SPAC. It is a SPAC that has not gone bankrupt. The problem where I think people are associating some level of significance with Rubicon is that Palantir did not buy more shares of Rubicon. Rubicon was not able to pay for services that they bartered from Palantir. And as a result of that, they had to, Palantir acquired those shares. And so I don't know if that's the reason why the stock has run up. I don't know if something happened fundamentally with the company because I haven't looked into it. But for those that want to get into RBT, it's an interesting company. You should just be warned that Palantir did not buy 8 million shares. They were, if you looked at the 8K, they got 8 million because Rubicon could not pay for services. So they had to barter equity in exchange for services, which isn't necessarily the best piece of news because if you can't pay for the software, maybe, you know, your finances aren't the right place. Granted, I don't know anything about Rubicon stock. I have to probably go a little more deeper into them, but Palantir was able to get those shares through bartering, not necessarily through paying for them themselves. And that's why Rubicon potentially has gone up. But a lot of people think Rubicon's going up because Palantir is buying a lot of shares. That's just not the case if you read the 8K. So a little bit different in the context of Rubicon. All right, awesome. We'll get to some more YouTube questions and we'll keep going from there. That moment with Dan Ives, Larry says, the moment with Dan Ives during the conference call was legendary. Yeah, I think it was really interesting. And to touch on the Dan Ives question a little bit, Dan Ives, the interesting thing about his report was that he says, I'm talking to CIOs and the only platform they're bringing up is Palantir. Now, maybe he's talking to a selective group of CIOs, but that is what compelled him, is what he said in his words, to put out the equity report. And then you hear what Karp has to say qualitatively. And this also kind of points to what Cathie might be thinking as well for why she decided to pull the trigger today. Karp is saying we've got 100 organizations using AIP, not monetized yet, 300 additional ones in the pipeline. They have 421 customers, 400 out of 421 of them, in the words of Karp and management, are in the pilot stages of using AIP. If even each of them paid $2 million additional for AIP, that's $800 million more in ARR. Right? I don't know if you annualize that, if you do that monthly, if that's a $2 million per year, $5 million per year, you imagine something like BP is paying way more than $2 million. So you can see the potential of having a really sticky clientele base want to use something like an AIP. And I think at that point, when Dan asked a really interesting question around why do you think AIP is getting the traction that it's getting? And look, 400 customers in the pipeline, and after 10 weeks of rolling it out, 5,000 users from those 400 customers within enterprises using the product. Shyam Sankar, the CTO, saying that's growing 50% month over month. I mean, like, that is pretty impressive. And Karp went on a little bit more of a philosophical tangent, which is that it is very hard to implement AI infrastructure. And this is the really unique thing Karp said, which I think probably caught Cathie's attention. He had a point in the earnings call, and I'm going to make a separate video on this as well, where he says, what we did 10 years ago was show the world the problem with an organization, an enterprise, a government, an NGO not having structured data. And then we showed them the solution of structuring the data, which ended up being the ontology. So like we showed the world what it was like to not have your data structured. And then we decided to show them the solution because we were able to solve the solution with the problem. Essentially, you have to sell the solution before you sell the problem, right? Like a movie is not good unless you have a problem and then you have a hero. And so they showed the problem and then they became the hero. And with AIP, he's saying that's the case. Now, I'll give the bull and bear case on how I believe him and how I don't believe him. But the bull case of his analysis here is that the world doesn't know how to actually use large language models in a way that substantially increases the enterprise value of an organization. And as a result of that, his argument is that Palantir has a pseudo monopoly on the AI infrastructure that is required to implement an LLM in a meaningful way. And as a result of that, if we have that monopoly, that is what gives him the confidence to say we can capture a decent amount of the entire market and we don't even need a pricing strategy. Because to be honest, how do you price a product where the client doesn't even really understand how to use the product, even though you as the company believe that in the next 5 years, this is going to be the premier product or the premier way that an organization interacts with information, which is exactly what they did with ontology 10 years ago. And so now you have to basically say, all right, use it for free, because you don't really believe us yet. You don't really understand the problems yet, but you will understand the problems eventually. And when you do understand the problems, our solution will be here. And because you didn't use anyone else's solution, because we got you in first, eventually we're going to be able to monetize on the back end, and we'll have pricing power to be able to do that, because you're going to trust our solution. If that's the case, maybe Kathy in her mind is like, all right, so I believe Carp around this idea that the world doesn't know how to use LLMs. Palantir is uniquely positioned to help you learn how to use LLMs, particularly because you need an ontology, which is just a metaphor for an understanding of a structured version of your data, to be able to add reality and context to the LLM so that it provides actual value to an employee using a large language model. And you need to do it in a secure way that has governance. And if Palantir is theoretically the only company that can do that, or do that in a meaningful way, then they are showing people the solution, showing people the problem, and then they're going to have pricing power on the solution with the problem itself. That is the bull case for what I think Kathy got persuaded by, at least something I got persuaded by in the earnings call. Now, the bear case to that is that that's just not true. It's that Palantir does not have a monopoly on AI infrastructure for LLMs. Databricks just acquired a company. Snowflake's just acquired a company. Microsoft, I know they're doing a ton of stuff. I've gotten a lot of DMs saying, look at the Microsoft competitors. I haven't gotten time to go into it, but I'm sure ChatGPT for the enterprise with security and governance, which is, in my opinion, in a nutshell, the exact same thing as AIP, that's coming. And if not, it's already here. And it's with Microsoft sales and distribution, it's going to penetrate organizations in a massive way. And so the bear side to why I think it's weird that Kathy's buying so much right now is because you've got to see the revenue growth from AIP actually substantiate to validate the philosophical monopolistic idea that Carp has around, we are the only ones that can implement AI infrastructure in a way that protects an organization's data, which, like, yes, I believe they can do that. I think it makes sense. Within 10 weeks, if you've got the biggest companies in the world using that product, I believe that is the case. I am still not sold on if they're the only ones that can do that. And quite frankly, I don't know enough about the industry. I got to keep digging further and further. And that's where I'll be very objective, that I can't say Microsoft and Google aren't working on that type of stuff. Maybe that's not an interesting business for them to worry about, since Google makes, $80 billion on ads and they just don't care about that. But if they did one day, what would that mean? And so the bear case is Palantir does not have a monopoly on AI infrastructure, and these 400 customers in the pipeline, it's not going to grow to 10,000 customers by 2030. Like, that's the bear case. And so the growth is going to not happen at a rate in which buying it at 40 billion. I mean, Kathy is obviously looking for some decent return here to get to 80 billion, which is even a double from here. It would be very hard if the growth is not there. The bull case is that the growth is definitely going to be there because Carp and Palantir are the only ones that can do it. Kathy is recognizing that. And instead of buying it at $9-10, she's like, all right, I'm going to pull the trigger at $16-17. And that's why she's buying. So I think that is a good argument. Sean, I see you in the chat. If you want to request to be a speaker, because you had a really good comment, you can request to be a speaker and I'll let you speak on Twitter Spaces. But Sean said right here, the Microsoft play proves the value potential. I think that's a phenomenal comment. I think that's a really, really good comment because it sets the value. And so that's another argument pushing into the bull case, which is that, look, if the biggest tech companies in the world are saying we are trying to implement something as similar to what Palantir is implementing, okay, that means it's valuable. That means it matters, right? That means, like, there is a market opportunity for this, and there is a lot of customers that are probably trying to go after that business. That doesn't mean Palantir has to win 100% of the market, but if Palantir can win 10, 20, 30% of that market, and it's a, I don't know, $700-800 trillion market, whatever Carp is saying, we have a TAM of $1 trillion, then that's going to be a decent return for shareholders, because shareholders would be able to do it. So that is a very interesting comment as well in terms of how it works here. Sean, I see your comment. Would love to, but cannot right now. No problem. Thank you for being here as well. Austin says, hands down, the best breakdown elevator pitch of Palantir's ontology and existing infrastructure is what makes it a true monopoly in reigning in AI, providing unrivaled ability for compliance. Yeah, and I think one of the other interesting things in regards to stock-based compensation yesterday was Carp basically said, or I think Sham said this, we're going to be tying AIP's success to employee stock-based compensation or employee success, which I think is really, really important, because that means as an employee, you should be incentivized to, if you're working for a client, to make it the best experience ever, or if you're selling a product via AIP, make it the best experience possible. And if you can, then you will be rewarded in more stock. We know in the latter half of the year, stock-based comp is going to go up. It was actually flat quarter over quarter in Q2. It was like 115 million or 114 million, which is down 30 million from last quarter in 2022, which I loved. So they were being very fiscally responsible over the past 6 months. And now the next 6 months, hopefully they can beat a little bit more on revenue targets and EPS. And if they have to increase stock-based compensation a little, that's not going to be the worst thing in the world. So that makes sense to me. Bears United says Microsoft will buy Palantir. Karp said yesterday on the earnings call, Palantir is not for sale. I just do not think he's the type of founder that wants to give up his baby. You got to remember, Karp's been in this for 20-something years. I don't think he wants his legacy to be Microsoft bought my company. Especially given the geopolitical ways in which he has, infiltrated the loudmouth that he has around Palantir. I don't think he wants Satya Nadella to acquire that company. So that's something I don't believe is going to happen. Look, if it does happen, I think there'll be a nice premium and shareholders, should be happy. But I think there's a lot of more progress for Palantir to go take it on themselves. All right, we got about 10 more minutes here. If anyone has any questions on Cathie Wood buying or not, then we can discuss that as well. If not, I'll talk about some more general earnings. One last point I have on Cathie buying is that I think some more institutional investors might potentially be interested in Palantir as a result of Cathie buying. One of the things I was told by someone is that everyone watches what Cathie does. Even if you're an institutional investor that thinks she has no idea what she's doing, you watch what she does because she's developed that level of brand authority for herself. And so that, along with this potential S&P 500 inclusion that is going to happen, we will be in the S&P 500 index within the next 8 to 10 months. When that happens, I'm not saying the stock has to pop up or down, but you probably don't want to be buying the stock when it has to get into the index. You want to be there a little bit before, as long as the macro does, if the macro shits the bed, then maybe Palantir goes back to $8 and it'll still get into the S&P 500, but you could buy it at $8 in the S&P 500. But if that doesn't happen and the growth is still there, the S&P 500 is going to be a major catalyst for Palantir, and that's going to be important as well. And so I think that would be a good thing. Mike Arcangelo says that is why they authorize buybacks. Nothing better to do with the capital right now, and they still have $2 billion in cash for whatever they want. Yeah, and I think this is an interesting question, which is what do you do with the money? Obviously, you would want a lot more people, or you would want Palantir to do something really interesting with the capital, especially in regards to sales and marketing. I mean, this is a crazy thought. They would never do this, but imagine taking $1 billion if you're Palantir, instead of buying back stock or instead of putting it to T-bills, and just being like, we are spending $1 billion this year on sales and marketing. So that's what, $250 million every quarter. That's kind of crazy to think that, but it's interesting they're not doing that if they have the capital to do it. And what leads me to think they're not doing that is they feel this macro environment is not conducive for them to do such a outsized move like that, because even if you spent $1 billion on sales, maybe it's not going to have an ROI. And that sounds crazy, right? Put $1 billion into sales, you should maybe make $1 billion back, at least 500 million back. But maybe they don't think that's going to happen. Maybe they think AIP is not ready to be scaled at that point. Maybe they have a problem with their sales culture where people don't really know how to sell AIP or Foundry, and so investing that much in sales is not going to happen. Regardless of what they feel, they are definitely not investing that money in sales and marketing to a level that I think a lot of shareholders would love to see them do, given they are way behind on the sales team aspect in regards to like Salesforce or Datadog or Databricks or definitely Snowflake that's spending 70% of revenue on sales and marketing. But maybe they have a different plan to do it. And if they have a different way to do it, then that's just a whole different way they're going to interpret their trajectory of growth. Karp should buy $1 billion in Bitcoin. Well, we know Peter Thiel loves Bitcoin, so that would be amazing. All right, last thing I'll say, thank you, Mike, for this final comment. Raymond James upgraded them as well. So this is also really, really interesting. Dan Ives came out with a $25 price target. And again, I'll be speaking to Dan Ives with Arnie Friday, 5 p.m. Eastern. If you're not following me on Twitter, Twitter's in the description. You can check it out there. We'll be live with Dan Ives Friday, 5 p.m. Eastern. So Dan Ives says $25 price target. Everyone's like, all right, it's a valuation a little stressed, $62.5 billion. That's kind of crazy, but all right, Dan Ives, $25. Raymond James comes out today, says instead of 18, we want them to be at $22, which is $3 below Dan. And so I think we're going to start to see some more price target upgrades. We saw some at $10. We saw some from 6 to 10. Some Rishi dude was like, keep it at $5. It's like, all right, buddy. We'll keep them at $5. And now I think I'm waiting on Mariana from Bank of America to see if she wants to hold the shares or she wants to upgrade from $18. She upgraded from 13 to 18. So the price target upgrades, whether we like it or not, has a fundamentally psychological impact on the market. And I think Cathie understands that as well. Now, SoFi got upgraded out the wazoo last week to $14, $15, $16. Truist Securities put them at $16, which is amazing. The stock lost all of their earnings gains. However, all these analysts still feel the fair value is $14, $15, $16. It's not $9. And when things start to get better, whether that's macro oriented, whether that's another great quarter, whether that's just more retail sentiment or more institutional investors getting excited by the company, those price targets start to reveal themselves in a more meaningful light, because now is the time for people to get excited to buy. And so the idea that Palantir is not dealing with price targets of $6 or $7 or $8 like they were for the past 2 years, where, there was, I think at one point they had a $3 price target, right? Like no one wanted to upgrade the shares, and for good reason. They weren't profitable. Carp said they wouldn't be profitable until 2025. Growth was not bad, all that stuff. Now you've got a prime position where they are profitable. The S&P 500 is coming up. They are growing. There's a pipeline of 400 customers ready to go that they will eventually monetize. They theoretically have a monopoly in the space to truly capture the market. And Wall Street is giving, here's the thing we didn't talk about at all today that I forgot to talk about. Wall Street is giving a freaking premium to AI companies. And if Wall Street's deciding to give a premium to AI companies, then that was the really unique thing about the stock action last night. If Wall Street's continuing to give this AI premium to companies, maybe that also is a artificial floor that has been constructed along with the share buybacks and the price target upgrades to fully convince Cathie Wood's team today that now is the time, or it's now or never. Because to be honest, it's such a weird thing to buy at 16, 17 bucks, because most of the investors I'm talking to that are very heavy in Palantir are not touching it at 16, 17 bucks, because we've been here for 2 years. Like, we know what the potential is. We were buying it at 30 at 2021, right? And so we know what it feels like to DCA. So we don't want to touch it at these levels, because we know like these levels are a bit overvalued given the growth rate. And by the way, when they were 30 bucks, they were growing 41% year over year, not 13%. And so Cathie coming in and saying, nope, 16 bucks. This is where I wanted to average up on my position that's already up 100 something percent. This is the time to buy. I think it sends a signal to the market. I think Wall Street is ready to give these companies an AI premium, and eventually Palantir has to prove the growth that justifies that AI premium. And if they're not able to do that, it's tanking the bed. But I have high hopes that they're going to be able to prove that. And I think Cathie has high hopes. And as a result of that, she's buying the stock. She's back here, and it's time to hook up with her ex once again. All right, last thing, we have one request in the chat on Twitter. I'm going to let you speak, and this is the last question. Vincent, before we end off today. You're live with 573 people on YouTube and 50 on Twitter. Go ahead.
Yo.
What's up, man? How are you?
What's up, brother? What do you think of the situation with Upstart? I mean, I hold this spot. I'm not in it too deep. I didn't buy too high back in the days when it was really high. But do you have any type of what do you think of that whole situation? Do you think, because if you compare it with Square and Block and all the earnings, I mean, even the double beat, whatever they did.
Vincent, we lost you. I think you were breaking up because you're in the car. In terms of Upstart, I mean, that's a fun question to end it on. I'll end it on. I don't know much about Upstart. I do know they were down 14% today. I knew they were up like 300% for the year. So I hope you got out of Upstart if you had some Upstart. I know we have my good friend Sean in the chat spent the past year trying to convince people to not to get so excited about Upstart. Look, when your net income, when you're not growing revenue 40% year over year, it's going to be tough. And that's what they reported today. So. All right, that is it. Last question I'll actually do on YouTube, more Palantir question. Michael says, why would you ask a question of one LLM when you can ask many LLMs? You need a committee here. There isn't one answer. There are many answers from Sham Sanker. Yeah, 100%. I think Sham also did a great job yesterday, basically explaining the power and the magnitude of what LLMs can become. And as a result of that, Wall Street decided not to tank the stock. I mean, I was publicly saying, look, if Palantir doesn't hit it out of the park, this baby's going back down. And for some reason, Wall Street's like, nope, we believe in Palantir right now, at least for today. And it's down like 7% today. It's still at 16 bucks. It's still up more than 100% in the past 3 months, which is really exciting for Palantir. So we'll see where it goes from there. That's it for me. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I really appreciate it. We had some breaking news. Cathie Wood has bought 873,000 shares of Palantir. She is back. This is her first buy since May 2023 when she bought 5.3 million shares. And her second buy since she liquidated 37 million shares back in February 2022. You know what? Sometimes you just gotta hook up with your ex and you might end up getting married to her. Thank you guys for watching and listening. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Have a good one.